What's up, YouTube? Eric here from Major League Trading, and I lost $750 today trading the NASDAQ futures. So let's talk about the trade. Let's talk about the things I did right. Let's talk about the things I did wrong, what I did and didn't like about the trade. And then ultimately, before we can even get to the trade itself, we got to take a look at the plan, right? What was the plan coming into the day? Why were we able to take that trade? Why were we thinking that? All of those things, right? So for that, I want to take it over to the Sunday Stock Talk. So this is just something in which I put out each Sunday night, and it's just my thoughts, my plan for the upcoming week. So last night, this went out at 10:05 p.m., so Sunday night at 10 o'clock Eastern. And I go through and I talk about a couple different things here, a couple different individual names in which I'm looking at. This one's currently my favorite at the moment. And then I give some scenarios here, right? So with this week in mind, I see a couple different scenarios, 1, 2, and 3. Now for this, I'm actually talking about the S&P futures here. When I give the levels, they'll be the same levels that are below here for the NASDAQ futures as well. But for this, just so we can visualize it and we can see everything all in one spot, this is kind of what I'm looking at, right? So scenario number 1 is we manage to pull back and we test the 64 quarters early on in the week. We can hold that and then go higher. So in my opinion, right now, I think the markets need a retest of this 64 quarter or the 519.75 level for the NASDAQ in order for us to really go anywhere, right? So I think markets are stalling, waiting for the opportunity to come down and test that level. That was a sneeze and a half. But yeah, I think we're waiting to come down and test that level. And then from there, we can decide, hey, do we go higher or do we fail from here? So that's scenario number 2, right? Which is we try to go higher and then we fail back under these 64 quarters, which gets us into 63.78 and some other levels down below. And it gets pretty ugly, right? Now, scenario number 3 is that we try to go higher on Monday, Tuesday without testing the 64 quarters. And then we just fade back into it later on in the week with a pretty small range on the overall week. Which if that is going to be the case and we're going to have a small range overall for the week, then it would make sense that today also is kind of going to be a small range unless we're going to go down and tag these lower levels of 64 quarters or those 519s for the NASDAQ, right? So we really want to do that before we can ultimately make the move on the week, in my opinion, right? So that's my thought process. That's my thinking. Now, when we open up on the day and trading starts taking place, here's a couple things in which I noticed, right? So we'll go ahead and pull over this 4 grid and I'll try and keep my face out of the way over here. What we'll notice initially, right, is the first kind of 30 minutes of the day, 25, 30 minutes of the day, we've got a nice rally taking place happening inside of the NASDAQ, right? At that same time, if we're looking at this specific bar and we're looking back left of it, the S&Ps have gone nowhere. They're just sitting completely sideways. The Russell, however, is just straight down, and the Dow is now straight down. So we've got the S&Ps going nowhere. We've got the NASDAQ trying to rally, and we've got some pretty decent weakness in the Russell and in the Dow. Right, so we've got some conflicting markets. So for me, I look at this and I go, okay, if we're going to go lower to come test these lower levels, which I think is what we want to do, right, down here to 64 quarters, I really don't think we're going to try and run away on the day. I don't think we're going to see, the massive 3% day to the upside. And NASDAQ rallies a couple hundred points, which we were up, I think at this point, like 100 and some change maybe. Well, I guess we can see, right? Closing print on Friday, somewhere around 672s. We traded up to 872, so we were up like 200 points, right? Give or take. So NASDAQ actually did have a pretty decent move to the upside, right? But I still think we need those overall lower level tests. So that was my thought process, right? Is that, hey, the highs are most likely somewhere up in this range of about 870, 875s. If we're really not going to go anywhere, and then we're going to get that pullback, right, down into 519s or this 650 here, just those overnight Sunday lows. That's all that is. So when I saw that and I go, okay, if we can manage to give me some sort of weakness, right, off of these highs, give me some sort of divergence, which we did have, right? We had that divergence that we were literally just looking at right here, right? These red arrows on the top of the screen there for the NASDAQ. We have all of those things, right? So I waited for this to ultimately sell off here. And then when we rallied back up into 760s here, or sorry, 860s here, is when I went ahead and took my position. So I got short the NASDAQ right up in here off of 860s with a stop loss at 885s. Now, the unfortunate part is, yes, this did come take my stop loss by 3 points, which is super unfortunate because then we ultimately rolled over and at least made new lows on the day. We didn't quite make it, all the way down into the 650s or the 519s, of course, but 3 points worth of stop out for it to then go ahead and drop, 100 points kind of sucks, right? It's not the most fun thing in the world. So that happened. Now, I say those couple things to say, one of the things in which I'm happy that I did with this is I'm happy that I managed it in the way in which I did, and I'm happy that I took my stop, right? And that I didn't try and just continue to fight this trend that could have been pretty bad, right? If we did decide to run away on the day, which I didn't think that was the case, then it could have gotten really ugly really fast. So I did one thing right, which was completely accept my risk and accepted my stop loss on this position. Now, the thing in which I ultimately didn't love about the position was that while, yes, I did take this position down in here, as we went lower in the NASDAQ here, because we had about 50 points in this, so we traded down here to 806s, right? As we got this pullback, one of the things in which we did was we got new lows in the S&Ps, which created us a divergence, and we got new lows in the in the Russell, which created us a divergence. Meanwhile, the Dow was not making those new lows. So this was telling me, hey, S&Ps and Russell, oops, sorry, we want to go back higher. NASDAQ and Dow are kind of leading the way. And there was a little bit of action that was taking place down here in the Dow that while I was watching it unfold, I'm like, I don't really love the way this is acting. Like, it's not, if we're going to continue this move lower in the NASDAQ and in the S&Ps and in the Russell, we really want to see all of these markets like moving in one direction. We want to see them moving lower from here, right? We want to see that weakness. We don't want to see any flip-flop kind of action taking place where, NASDAQ's getting a red bar here, but somehow the Dow is putting in a 5-minute green bar, right? We want to see that chemistry across the board for all of the indices. They want to be moving in harmony, in sync, right? And so we weren't getting that on this. And I mentioned it, but at the time there was really nothing I could do, right? Because we had a nice little push down. It was only about 2 Rs. And when I look at my risk reward to get back down here to 650s, it was 8.4 to 1. So at that moment in time, I'd only captured about 25%, right? Given that I was up about 50 points on this trade, I had only captured about 2 Rs, 25% of the potential that I saw on the board for the NASDAQ. So there was really nothing in which I could do there. I could maybe bring my trails down to break even and make it a, no lose type of situation. Could have done that. But I also didn't want, if we did decide to rally back up and maybe challenge these highs here by a little bit, maybe push up a little bit over 80s, not too far, right? Because my stops are at 85s, and then wanted to roll over. I wanted to give it the room in order to be able to do that. And unfortunately, I did, but it just was 3 points too short. So an unfortunate series of events that kind of led to that. And even more so, I think it's just kind of ironic that where I basically get stopped out at, we ultimately have another divergence, right? Now, from a risk management standpoint and all of that, could I have taken this additional entry here in the NASDAQ with stops up over 88s and found another way in, right? Or waited for some type of similar entry to the one in which I took from over here, right? Is let us get the pullback, rally up, set the lower high, do all the things, right? And then find some way to get into this position for the move lower, right? I could have certainly done that. And I think the big piece here is that it's a Monday. It's really early in the week. We have a couple different scenarios we want to ultimately see play out. And I already tried one time of fighting the divergences here by getting short the NASDAQ and then not getting out when there was an opposing divergence, which again, my hands were kind of tied from a risk metric standpoint. It didn't make sense for me to do so, given how much more there was still left on the table for that trade. So I managed those things accordingly, right? But I was still fighting this overall divergence that we had set in the S&Ps and the Russell, right? So it's kind of in this weird spot. And what I ultimately didn't want to have happen is that we end up getting chopped up on the day. And before you know it, we've taken 2, 3, 4 trades. And now we're down like 2, 3, 4 Rs on the day, as opposed to only being down 1, right? So, and not quite even a full R realistically. But that was my thought process. That was my thinking, kind of leading into the trade for this week. And then ultimately, where I drilled it down into the 2-minute, tried to find my entry, was able to find my entry and kind of all of those things, right? Now, so my full plan still, all this stuff here, the individual names and tickers and all that stuff is still very much valid. Bitcoin, gold, bonds, I think is a very interesting chart at the moment. Should probably be paid attention to a little bit more than maybe what it is at the moment. But out of this list of names, the one in which we put a position on for this week is going to be in ZS. So we did take the one NASDAQ futures trade, and then we also added a position here, which was kind of early in the morning, in ZS. So in ZS, there's a couple of things that I like about this. Number one, it's a lotto type of trade, which means ultimately just means, hey, if we're going to play this, we have to try and find a strike that's, up close to where we think this thing can go and just size it for 0, right? We're probably not going to get the most picture perfect entry. The options in here, I'm not necessarily interested in trying to get something in the money and then holding those, especially overnight, right? Because that opens those up to additional risk. Like if I buy a contract down here, for $5, $6, $7, and I put on what would be a normal position size, and let's say it's sized for, a $2 stop loss, right? So maybe I'm willing to risk $200 on the position, so I buy one contract. Well, if it gaps down, that $5, $6, $7 contract could immediately go to 0 or 50 cents, right? And now instead of losing $200, I lose $500 or $600 or $700 on the position, right? So for me, the lotto type thing is, hey, I want to go ahead and pick some strikes that are up there where I think this thing can ultimately reach to. And then, again, let it run to 304.47s, which is ultimately here where I think the target is in ZS. So 304.47s. And if we switch this over to like a 15-minute chart and we show the extended session, we had earnings the other week, technically last week, right? Where we traded up in after hours and we ticked this 305 number, right? So we traded 304.47s, which is the level. We got a high of 305 in here. So for me, I really like where this thing is on the charts. I really like the move that we saw from Friday in the breakout, right? So if we take this and it can, let's make it a little mini lesson, right? If we take this and we go, okay, Friday's action did what ultimately, right? Friday we opened, we managed to make a pretty decent rally, about 5-6 points above opening print there, right? In Zscaler. This daily chart looks really, really good, right? I kind of like this. This was that move from Friday. We've got 4 nice red bars to the downside there, a little bit of bottoming tails action happening. And then we get this move on Friday. And the thing in which I like about it even more is that when we drill this down and we start to look at it and we go, okay, there's Friday. What ultimately took place in the NASDAQ here on Friday compared to what Zscaler did, right? NASDAQ got the big gap to the upside, which is fine. Zscaler didn't really get the gap, but NASDAQ made the move. That was another monster sneeze. NASDAQ made the move lower here on Friday, right? And managed to get a little bit of a bounce from that 519 level. But Zscaler actually showed good strength and was able to rally on Friday and then continue that rally here today on Monday. So for me, I'm interested in this one. We put positions on. I like it. And ultimately going to look to see if we can get this thing up into $304.47. And it would be even better if we could get the NASDAQ to come down, retrade those 519.75s, and then see this thing make a move up into 304.47s here for the week. Anyways, that's a video on how I managed to lose $750 today in the NASDAQ, what I did right, what I did wrong, and then ultimately kind of my plans and my thoughts going into the rest of this week and my favorite name on the board so far. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Comment down below if you enjoyed it, ideas and tips for future videos, whatever it might be. And I will see you guys on those future videos. Hope it helps. Peace.